Officially, the investigation into the most critical single aircraft event in recorded history is over. It was Japan Airlines Flight 123. 520 passenger seats went silent. I kept counting. That was my only job. Altitude, speed, pressure, control inputs. Numbers arrived one after another. Then one number changed. Everything after that followed it. The engines kept running. The pilots kept fighting. Later it turned again. The control inputs never stopped. The record seems to suggest the pilots made the wrong decisions. I only know the first value that refused to match every flight I had stored before it.
Subscribe, like, and turn on notifications.
My recording begins like countless others. The engines are stable. The climb is routine. Passengers settle into their seats. Cabin crew continue their work. Nothing inside my memory suggests an emergency. Every departure begins almost the same way. That is why this one hides so easily among the others. Then cabin pressure changes, not gradually, instantly. A violent disturbance passes through the aircraft. I record it. The cockpit reacts immediately. The first control input arrives without delay. Another follows almost immediately. More keep coming. I do not record hesitation. I record continuous corrections. Based on what I recorded, the first explanation appears simple. Perhaps an engine has failed. All 4 engines continue producing thrust. Their values remain consistent. The power is still there. Speed remains. Lift never disappears. I have recorded aircraft reaching the ground with less available power. This one keeps moving away from that outcome. That should have made recovery possible. Every correction is answered by another movement the crew did not request. Another input follows. Another disagreement follows it. The distance between command and response continues growing. One interpretation is that the pilots are making mistakes under pressure. People often believe emergencies become dangerous because someone chooses the wrong action. It is an easy explanation. The control wheel keeps moving. New commands enter the aircraft. The aircraft responds differently each time. Those 2 records never become the same again. There is another detail. The aircraft never behaves like one with failed engines. It still has energy. It still has momentum. It still refuses to obey. That combination should not exist for long. Every new command arrives because the previous one failed. That sequence never changes. Outside the cockpit, families continue believing they are traveling toward Osaka. Parents remain beside their children. Couples continue conversations, interrupted only moments earlier. Friends expect to arrive before evening. Ground controllers hear voices that remain measured. The crew declares an emergency. They ask to return. Nothing in those transmissions suggests surrender. Everything suggests determination. Because one common explanation no longer fits. The record never shows the crew giving up. Control inputs continue almost until my final entry. If experienced pilots were still flying and all 4 engines were still producing power, why did every passing minute make the aircraft less predictable instead of more stable? Each new entry makes the previous answer less convincing. Only the flight remains. It stays in the air far longer than my earlier recordings would suggest. Most recordings inside my system end shortly after a critical structural anomaly. Each new entry extends it. The airplane is still flying. Every new entry tells me the emergency is continuing instead of ending. The nose rises. Speed begins to fall. Moments later, the aircraft descends. Its speed returns. The cycle repeats. Each climb costs speed. The following descent restores it. Neither condition lasts for long. Control inputs continue arriving. I never record a pause long enough to believe the crew has stopped trying. Perhaps they are beginning to regain control. Perhaps every correction is bringing the aircraft a little closer to stability. My memory disagrees. Each recovery lasts only briefly. Another movement interrupts it. Another correction follows. Nothing remains stable long enough to become control. The sequence repeats until it begins to feel normal. That is what makes it abnormal. The aircraft climbs far higher than the crew requests. Moments later, it begins descending much faster than they intend. Neither movement follows a normal flight path. There is another detail. It arrives quietly. Hydraulic pressure disappears. I continue recording the same value. It never changes again. I only know that one value changes once. It remains changed. The flight should end soon after that change. It does not. The airplane still turns. It climbs again. Later it descends. Every movement suggests something is still influencing it. Small changes in engine thrust continue changing the aircraft's path. I cannot explain why it still works. If the primary flight controls are no longer responding as expected, why does changing engine power still alter the airplane's path? The official investigation later explains part of that answer. Outside the aircraft, radar watches an impossible route. The track turns away. Later, it bends back. It approaches the mountains before drifting away again. The route never settles into one direction. People watching from the ground later describe an aircraft flying unusually low. Others remember hearing engines that never became silent. Air traffic controllers remain in contact. The crew answers every transmission. Their requests remain focused. Headings are requested. Assistance is requested. They continue searching for a way back. Because another popular explanation begins to disappear. The record continues receiving commands almost until my final entry. That is the only conclusion I can verify. The airplane is still flying. The explanations begin before the flight is even ended. One interpretation is that an internal explosive charge caused the emergency. The damaged aircraft appears to support it. The sudden emergency appears to support it. The official investigation could not support that conclusion. No evidence confirmed an internal detonation. I only know the emergency begins before every number starts changing. Another explanation follows. Attention shifts outside the aircraft. Some suspect another aircraft. Others imagine an external projectile or an unexpected object. It explains everything without asking what was already inside the aircraft. My recording never sees another aircraft. Later radar records do not confirm one either. Then another theory survives. Some believe the captain made the wrong decision. Others believe the crew should have done something differently. People often look for one moment where everything could have been saved. If one decision changed, perhaps the ending would change as well. Based on what I recorded, that explanation also seems possible. The control inputs never stop. Some become much larger than earlier ones. Others arrive only seconds apart. Read by themselves, the inputs appear increasingly aggressive. The complete record tells a different story. The pilots are not making random movements. Every major control input follows another unexpected movement from the airplane. The aircraft moves first. The crew responds immediately. The next movement does not match their command. Another correction follows. That sequence repeats until my memory ends. The airplane no longer follows every command. Instead, the crew spends each moment responding to its behavior. That order leaves little support for the idea that the pilots created the emergency. Their radio transmissions create the same conclusion. The crew does not speak like people searching for excuses. They continue requesting vectors. They continue working toward a return. They continue reporting controllability problems. Nothing in those exchanges sounds like surrender. The voices remain focused on recovery. Another belief begins attracting attention. Some believe age alone explains the failure. Others point to years of accumulated service. Age appears to explain it. The investigation keeps searching anyway. The official record extends beyond the flight itself. Thousands of flights had passed before this one. Most ended exactly as expected. One maintenance record remains relevant. After the other, theories fade. It documents a repair completed years before my recording begins. The investigation eventually returns to that record. Investigators began reviewing maintenance logs. One entry kept appearing. Several years before this flight, the aircraft struck its tail during landing. The aircraft returns to service after the repair. Successful flights accumulate over the following years. Eventually, they number in the thousands. My memory contains thousands of ordinary flights. None of them point back to that repair. Based on those records, one explanation seems obvious. Nothing in the operational record suggests the repair has failed. Thousands of ordinary flights reinforce that belief. That belief lasts until investigators compare my final recording with the older maintenance files. Then, investigators compared one maintenance record with my final numbers. The record did not match what everyone had believed. The repaired pressure bulkhead had not been restored according to the approved structural procedure. Time passes without another warning. The aircraft continues operating through thousands of departures and landings. Nothing in those flights separates it from the rest of the fleet. Every successful flight makes the repair appear ordinary. Every ordinary landing makes the next departure easier to trust. The investigation eventually identifies the repair. I only know thousands of ordinary flights ended safely before one finally broke that pattern. The aircraft keeps returning. Routine maintenance continues. Passengers board as they always have. Nothing tells me this aircraft should be treated differently. Based on what I recorded, one answer seems likely. Some earlier flight must have looked different. The investigation searched backward through every preserved record. The record shows no earlier warning. No inspection removes the aircraft from service. Nothing forced anyone to stop flying it. Then, one departure became different from every departure before it. The rear pressure bulkhead failed. The first warning I ever record arrives, only after the structure has already changed. Cabin pressure changes instantly. Hydraulic pressure disappears soon after. My numbers change at once. The crew reacts without delay. Neither returns to its earlier state. Every new command exists because the previous one failed. The struggle continued until the recording stopped. Long after the recording ended, investigators recovered farewell notes. Those notes were written while the final numbers were still being recorded. Only the investigation places those two records beside each other. The investigation answers how control disappeared. No earlier flight is ever found to have given the same warning. Every earlier recording looked ordinary. Mine did not. The first warning entered my memory only after the structure had already failed. By then, there was no earlier moment that called for intervention. The opportunity had already passed. My recording stops. Silence follows. Emergency responses began. The first rescue did not reach the site during the night. Recovery operations began after daylight. The timeline records when those decisions happened. It does not preserve every reason. Different conclusions continue long after the investigation. When rescuers finally reached the wreckage, they discovered something my final numbers could never tell me. Not everyone had disappeared. 4 people were still alive. That changes the meaning of my final 32 minutes. my recording ends on the mountain. The investigation reaches its conclusion. The first number appears again. It entered the record exactly like every number before it. Nothing in that first value tells me what the next 32 minutes will become. I only knew another number had arrived. Investigators identified the failed rear pressure bulkhead as the cause. If my first abnormal value looked no different from every ordinary flight before it, which moment was already too late? Don't miss out on the next content. Subscribe, like, and turn on notifications.